Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of the Late Night Lake Show podcast. It is your host, Ricky and Omar. Joining us today is a very special guest. Omar, I know we talk about special guests all the time. We love all of our guests, but we have a heavy hitter in the building today. Joining us in the Late Night Lake Show studios is Laker beat writer and sideline reporter for Spectrum SportsNet, radio host of ESPN 720, and also, as everyone knows, one of the main co-hosts of the Laker Film Room podcast. New friend of the show, Mike Trudell. Mike, how are you feeling today, my man?
Guys, it's a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate the vibes of the Late Night Lake Show. I am a late night guy. I have been my entire life. In fact, that's lined up pretty well with my NBA habits, especially being out of the West Coast. And so I'm with that. Now, kids make it a little tricky because they're still going to wake up in the morning, okay? But in terms of late night, you're right up my alley. So it's a pleasure to be with you.
Let's dive into it, man. You are in Vegas right now, so there's no other better place to start. There's a lot going on in Lakerland these days, as there always are. It's a little different than last year, though, Mike, right? We got a couple of new faces. Lakers brought into the second round, picked up Max Christie. We'll talk about him in a bit. Obviously, a brand new head coach in Darvin Ham doing his presidential runs all through Las Vegas. And it wouldn't be the Lakers, Mike, if there wasn't just a little bit of drama on the sideline. So there's a lot going on down there in Vegas. We just wanted to start and get your feedback on what's the vibe comparing to last year for Summer League 2K23 with the Lakers.
Honestly, it's here in Vegas, right? It's pretty low key. Now, I say that I parachuted in. I missed the first game. So I went to the first two games of the California Classic in San Fran. Then I had to go back to LA to do some of the free agency interviews as they introduce 5 of the new acquisitions. Then I popped back over here for Sunday, which is my first game. And so it was it's kind of, I'll put it this way. You mentioned Max Christie. So Max, I think, does have a chance, right, to get some minutes as the season goes on, depending on how they fill out the rest of the rotation. But there isn't necessarily that person who you see as being a for sure part of the rotation. And there's still so many questions about the actual senior squad as to, as you mentioned, the Laker Film Room pod, shout out to Darius and Pete. We've been kind of talking in two different ways about it, right? So what happens with the whole Russ situation? Is he the starting point guard at the start of the year? And it's hard to kind of craft what a rotation looks like until that question is answered. And right now, of course, I think you assume that he's going to be here. That's the way that Darvin Ham is speaking about. That's the way that they are orchestrating and putting together ideas. But is anything that's going to happen here in Vegas in Summer League going to impact that too much as either an additional free agency acquisition or a potential trade? Well, not necessarily. So with all of that said, I just kind of then enjoy this, right? It's the low-key part. There's still guys to watch. I'm still curious about how these guys are playing, but it's low pressure, right? It doesn't feel like something has to happen. Whereas if you're an Orlando Magic or Oklahoma City fan, right, or Houston, right, and you're watching your top pick, be like, oh no, is he not as good as the guy before him in this one game? So,
right.
So that part of it is pretty low-key here.
Yeah, and you mentioned Max, another guy that got me thinking. At least in the California Classic, I was ready to beat the drum on the Jay Huff hype train. He looks so dominant and someone, at least in my opinion, maybe like a two-way guy potentially. Going into the regular season, I just love his size and just his presence. Deterring anything at the rim, and then obviously stretching the floor as a big. That's so important in today's NBA. So I was excited to see him in the summer league, but he's out with health and safety protocols. So I take a step back, and my glass half full outlook on him, it prevents other teams from poaching him because McClung is already on the Warriors and he's killing it over there. Can you speak to his just his presence not being there, and if we expect to see him at all in summer league?
So the way that health and safety protocols work is you don't ever really know because they keep that information proprietary as they should. Now, you can start to do some of the math on just the time that he got it and figure, all right, well, you would think he might be able to be back for one of the last couple of games. We won't know that until it happens. But I think, Omar, your point there that's key is he's made some real progress from last year. And I get a chance to watch several South Bay Laker games, and I always end up calling a couple, and it just keeps me a little bit tighter to that, and then also helps me stay a little bit sharp. And so I got to see him in person several times. And, the idea of what he is in the current NBA, I like, in that he's pretty, and he'll even tell you this, like I'm going to protect the rim. I'm going to space the floor on offense and occasionally roll to the rim and or get a putback dunk or just rebound around the basket. Like he's kind of one of those bigs that knows how the modern big is being used in the NBA. And he's not calling for a bunch of post up touches, right? He's not trying to shoot a bunch of mid-range jump shots. He's really doing his job. And I think that he's developing physically a little bit more. And there's a place in the NBA for a guy like that. And I do think even in the difference between the Lakers and the 2 games that he played and the now 3 games that he hasn't, you've been able to see the lack of that presence there. So the next question is just he's not on a 2-way, right? And he doesn't currently have a roster spot. So has he impressed anybody either internally or externally enough to get more of a secure spot? And that's a question, but I do think the fact that he has not played yet in Vegas does tamp some of that, which again, maybe that benefits the Lakers, right? But right. You don't want to just look at it from their perspective. You want to think about it from Huff's perspective too, right? Because he's trying to get, right, as all these guys are, they're all trying to get that full NBA contract.
He's like, I need a job, so maybe I should just be as healthy as possible and get there on the court, not worry about who's poaching who on me. I had mentioned Max Christie earlier in the show, and honestly, Mike, admittedly, I talk about on this podcast a lot that young guys, I love them, but I'm kind of in the field of let me know when they start playing some NBA games, and then we'll start paying attention to things like that. Max Christie, 2nd round pick, the Lakers bought. I was joking with my buddies earlier that day in our group chat, Omar and our other co-host Kwame. They had let me know that, hey, Max is from the area, right? He actually played in the same conference that I went to high school and everything about. And once I saw that he was a Rolling Meadows kid, I decided to throw out a tweet that day, morning of the draft, and saying, the Los Angeles Lakers will be selecting Max Christie for no other fact that he's from Arlington Heights. That I did. And Rob Pelinka loves his, Big Ten hoopers. Lo and behold, that happened. Did not place my bet, though.
Well, yeah, but the best thing about Max Christie, right, is that his mom played at Northwestern.
Yeah.
I mean,
yep.
And this is, of course, I assume I haven't gotten a chance to sit down with Max yet for the full discussion. I've kind of hit around it, right? Because my boy Dave McMenamin is a big Syracuse guy, and he's always talking crazy about Cole Swider. And I said, well, hold on, Max is adopted. He is our chosen son out of Northwestern, which doesn't necessarily have a ton of alumni out there. So that I like that concept though of his mom knowing the game. Maybe think a little bit of like Jaden Ivey, right? We saw so much of that around the draft coverage of his mom, who's a pretty notable figure in the basketball world. So that did get my my purple pride going a little bit. And by the way, guys, Northwestern
and
Lakers
Rob
purple,
obviously loves his Big Ten Midwest guys. Him also being an Illinois guy himself, but I know that wasn't the reason the Lakers decided to draft him, Mike. So outside of just the vicinity of where he decided to grow up and play college basketball, from what you heard, what did the Lakers really like when they saw the film on Christie?
So the way that I start to learn about prospects is, it sounds like a little bit similar to you. I don't particularly like watching college basketball anymore, and I hope, no offense to those that do, I am so locked into the NBA, and if you're a league pass junkie, there isn't time to then really watch it. Well, I shouldn't say there isn't time. You can make that kind of time, but that's a big time commitment if you want to try to be an expert on the league that you're watching, the players in the NBA, and then also watch enough college basketball. Like, I'll watch the occasional game, right? But I'm saying enough to really have takes and opinions about who should be drafted. I think. Yeah. So what I do though, like the Lakers have been really successful in their scouting department for many years now, and the assistant GM and / director of scouting, Jesse Buss, I think is the key there. And Rob Pelinka, since he's come in, has really worked with Jesse, and I think that the vibe there has been really good, where they've trusted what the scouts are seeing and the guys that they like. And we can go through the list. I've put it up on Twitter and on articles for years, but the Larry Nance at 27 and Kuz at 27 and Hart at 30 and Thomas Bryant at 42. Yeah, Zubats, right? In the low 30s. Like they've had so many guys there, and the only player that they've taken, and by the way, this includes Mo Wagner, who was number 25, and I get it. Mo has not had a huge career or anything at this point, but he's still in the league. And for a late first round pick, and especially a second round pick, that's saying a lot. The only
Right.
guy that they took that isn't still in the league, and I think Darius brought him up when we were talking about the other day, is Anthony Brown. And to have basically one miss out of 10 plus of the last pick, so I come in thinking when they like a guy, and I know that they liked Christie because he was high on that list right before the draft even started, then that immediately gets my spidey senses going. I'm like, oh, okay, we might have something here. So even just going before that, when they got the pick, when they made the trade to get that pick from Orlando, I was very intrigued too, because I was like, oh, that probably means they've done, because they've got their master list, right? They've got a board that's literally 1 through 60, and then of the prospects that they like talent wise, and then so fast forward after the draft, Rob does his press conference, and we ask him a couple questions about Max, and I asked him something along the lines of, hey, what's the balance of looking for talent and looking for a guy that could be a great long-term piece, and considering LeBron's entering year 20, right? It's a team that wants to win right now, a guy that can play right now. And his answer was essentially, no, we took the guy that we think is going to be the best player long term. And didn't just try to, at 35, didn't just go and find somebody who was maybe a little bit more NBA ready, but then would not be the kind of asset that I think Christie could be. So that's a long-winded way of saying that the process by which they end up getting Christie is one that I have kind of learned to trust. And it's I think that his play so far has backed that up in the fundamentals that he showed, especially in the defensive end. And offense is still going to take some time to get to that NBA level, but he's got a lot of stuff already, and that's, I think, pretty enticing to see.
You got that nice base of just understanding defensive basketball. We were listening to your last podcast earlier talking about Christie, and a guy having that sense of awareness on the defensive end and knowing how to stay in position to guard on ball, off ball. That's years of coaching. That is being brought up under that style of coaching and tutelage. So I just shameless plug. I do want to shout out the Missouri Valley Conference, because we played defense. We picked up all 94 feet, however long the high school basketball court is. But yes, Max Christie, shout out to him. Hopefully, we see that he is a name that is a longer development for the Lakers as far as how many years we are with him, because the one thing that the Lakers will do and not hesitate to do is flip some of the younger names to get some immediate help. But it is nice to see that the Lakers were looking longer window when making that draft selection. One more question about these young guys. I honestly didn't have any expectations for Scottie Pippen Jr. Coming in. He has surprised me the most. What do you see when you see him take the court and kind of really play like he believes he's one of the best players out there?
Yeah, I'm intrigued by Scottie Pippen Jr. I think that when you just look at his raw numbers from Vanderbilt, they're pretty impressive. I mean, this is somebody that's got a nice control of a game. I think there are some Tyus Jones vibes in just this very brief time that I've watched him. Tyus was a little bit sharper in terms of kind of like assisted turnover, and I also was a little more familiar with him because he's one of the rare guys out of Minnesota, although that's becoming less rare now since you had Chet and Suggs the last couple of years. But, Tyus grew up in a suburb not too far from where I did, outside of Minneapolis. And also just kind of size-wise, right? So obviously Scottie is smaller. But there's the IQ stuff and then knowing how to play point guard, that's something that I am not surprised by for an NBA player, particularly a player of Scottie Pippen Sr.'s pedigree, right? That he would know the game pretty well.
Right.
The question is then, so the question is kind of how long does it take? How long can he, or how well can he hold up defensively at that size? And I think he's pretty tough defensively. So I'm intrigued. I don't think that right now, right, he's somebody that's immediately into your rotation as an NBA player. But I also don't think he would kill you if he came in to run a second unit for a little bit of time. So. And that's why it's nice to have him on a two-way, where you see how he develops with the South Bay Lakers. And as he continues to play well there, then who knows, right? Maybe you do need a little bit, depending on what they do with the rest of the roster. Maybe they do need a little bit of that creation off the bench, and they need somebody who can come in and give you a few minutes of ball. Right now, I think that you have a lot of guys that can still do that, even in Austin Reeves, right? He wasn't that sort of pure point guard that Scottie Pippen Jr. is, but you'd rather have Austin on the floor right now, right, than Scottie Pippen Jr. But it's just it's a nice. They're going to get a window here to see how he can continue to develop with the G League squad.
Mike, where do you fall with there was a lot of pushback on Austin Reeves not coming and playing in the summer league. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I got to catch up very briefly with Austin and THC. They were sitting courtside over by the Laker bench before the game, and it was more just sort of what have you been up to? Yeah, what have you been working on in the gym, like that kind of stuff. I didn't ask him, hey, did you think about playing? Because that's not really his decision. That's really more of a management decision. I think that. So I'll try not to contradict myself. Generally speaking, I like when guys play. Just period. If you're going to be a basketball player, you should be playing basketball. And this came up like last year. You think about James Wiseman, right, and just being Golden State being ultra conservative, and then they bring him back for very brief minutes here in summer league. The number 1 pick, Paulo Banchero, plays in the first 2 games, and then they shut him down already, especially right before Chet. And I
was so excited for that matchup.
Yeah, I mean, the league is still ultimately so 2 sides of this. 1, that's how you get better playing basketball. 2, it's an entertainment product. We're trying to put it out there for fans. Like that's why the contracts continue to go up, because people continue to watch and they want to put them on TV, and people will watch sports live, which means you can still advertise. So I felt this way for years. Like the San Antonio Spurs, I blame in a lot of ways for changing the paradigm here when they just started to sit guys and to rest guys just because. And by the way, that hasn't necessarily cut down on injuries since teams started to rest guys more. Nope. Because what ends up happening then is it's that the body gets out of balance with what the typical expectations are. And that's a whole nother road that we could go down. But I do also think that you can differentiate. So for right now, since this has already happened and all teams are basically treating things this way, you don't see a lot of second-year players playing, period, unless they still have something to really prove to their teams. Or if they're on some injury rehab type thing like Wiseman, who, by the way, I don't think will end up playing much more here in Golden State. So Austin or anybody else, right, that's on the Lakers, I don't think that he has anything left to prove, right, at this point. Now, could you go and let him run the offense, as I just alluded to with Scottie Pippen Jr.? Like, could you have him come in? I mean, I guess, but again, I don't know if that's something that the Lakers feel like they need to see, and so therefore, it hadn't even occurred to me that he would play based on how things have gone the last couple of years in the summer league. And when I first started coming to summer league in 2006, then I think or even when the Lakers won the title a few years ago, I think it was in 17, and Ingram played the first game, right, coming back as the number 2 overall pick the previous season.
Magic shut him down, right? Was that the game that Magic
exactly.
Was like, take him out. He's done. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then they won anyway, right? Even though Lonzo didn't play in the championship, Kuz goes for 30. My man Alex Caruso crushing it. Matty Thomas, I remember. So,
but yeah, sharpshooter.
Point being, it's just changed the way that these things are being treated, and I don't think for the better. I'd rather see more guys play, and I'd rather see these games be more entertaining. But unfortunately, that's what the trend's been.
Right, makes sense. Unless you're the Detroit Pistons, it seems like they're starting their whole starting lineup out there with Sadiq Bey, Cade Cunningham, and I forget who else they're adding. But no, it makes sense.
Isaiah Stewart,
Isaiah Stewart too. Yeah, I was surprised to see him. It makes sense. I mean, I think if he was out there, you already have at least in your head a role defined for him. You're probably going to be taking opportunities away from the 2A guys that we just talked about. You want to see more burn out of Max Christie, Scottie Pippen, and Cole Swider. So yeah,
we're gonna take a quick break, y'all, and when we come back, we're gonna talk about our new head coach. Lakers have chosen their coach of the next era of Lakers basketball. Let's dive into the man behind the name. Late Night Lake Show. We'll be right back.
The Late Night Lake Show podcast is sponsored by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best legal way to play daily fantasy player props in states like California, New York, Texas, and more. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. The best part is you can mix players from different sports. You can take the over on LeBron combined with the under on Mahomes in the same entry. Prize Picks is the easiest way to play daily fantasy because it's just you versus the projected numbers. Just use our promo code LNLS and any deposit you make can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. So go support the brand and go win you some money. It's the best of both worlds. Again, use our promo code LNLS.
All right, Mike. So I think the number one thing that I just need your personal perspective on, because I assume you are a normal size human that is surrounded by giants as your job every day. Can you tell me like Darvin Ham's actual stature? Like this is not a normal sized person. He's a big dude, right?
Yeah, no, Darvin's like an NFL player. Yeah, when you see it, like that's the build of Darvin. Like he's big. I mean, he's physically intimidating. You know, he's all kinds of solid. He's the kind of guy like if you just run into him walking out of the elevator, like you're gonna feel it a little bit. You know, so no, he's big. And it's funny. When I'm in Vegas, obviously, and I've got like a Laker t-shirt on, and so I was going down to the lobby, and I think at a certain point fans figure out what teams are staying at which places, and so what inevitably happens with me is that somebody runs into me and like, oh, hey, Mike from the Laker, blah blah. Oh man, I didn't realize you're not as short as I thought you were. It's like I am an average sized human, right? I think I'm 5'9", you know, yeah. But people are used to seeing me next to the likes of a Darvin Ham or a 7-footer or LeBron's 6'8". So that happens all the time, and especially in NBA arenas, and especially in hotels. So, but when you do see Darvin, you can feel his presence, and I think that it actually is important in a way because Darvin is he's a really caring, kind of like nice guy. He's funny, like everybody likes him, but there's something about his physical presence that I think brings a little bit more gravity when he's in a coaching context. And we just as humans, like going back to kind of caveman roots, like there's just something about the size that projects a certain amount of power if held in a certain way. And so I think that's something that actually helps Darvin, and like he can be a little bit nicer even just by having that physical respect that's hard to sort of define until you're around him in person. But I do think that it makes an impact.
Do you think that it's something that you can see the difference even from last year and how, players are referring to their coach or talking about their coach in comparison to Vogel? Vogel was here, for a championship, but then you started hearing things about, well, there's a certain level of respect that players just give other former players that Vogel just didn't have that in his pocket. Now, everything we heard from LeBron, everything we heard from AD was that they respected Vogel to the highest degree. But I'm wondering, Mike, are you sensing any difference because Ham's a former player, because he is a large human being? Are you sensing any difference in how the team is responding to him?
Well, it's too early to say, right? Just because they haven't really been, the senior squad guys haven't really been around much other than to come over and do the DAP, in Vegas and at certain times at the practice facility. But we're not privy to that unless I happen to be like walking over to the equipment room to grab something or something. So I would say stay tuned on that. But I wouldn't necessarily always relate that even to the former player thing, because you can have, there are some former players that don't have that same type of swagger and size. And there are some non-players that do have that swagger. Think about like Eric Spoelstra, I guess would be the most obvious one, especially coming out of the whole Jimmy Butler thing, which I don't think it was overblown. It just we did pay a lot of attention to it, but clearly it didn't end up having an adverse effect on things, and in fact, it might have brought them together in certain ways. So I
Mike,
think
they did the same thing with Spoelstra with I think it was Dwayne. It was LeBron and Spoelstra bumping shoulders, or D Wade back in the Heat days, and like
it was
Spoelstra
LeBron in his first year.
Yeah, just kept going. And that, to your point, it's just that level of respect that it's like, those things just aren't going to mean the same thing with somebody that you respect a little bit less.
I did an interview with Darvin, and actually, so the first time I did one was 2011 when he was an assistant, and I put it up on the website, and it's like getting to know Darvin Ham. And so then I wanted to revisit when he got the job. And so a couple weeks ago, I sat down with him, and that's on the Lakers website right now, Lakers.com. And one of the questions that I asked him was a little bit like the question you asked me. He was on that staff in Atlanta where it was, Quinn Snyder and Taylor Jenkins and Kenny Atkinson, right, on Budenholzer's staff, and Darvin was the only former player. And I said, did you feel that at all? Like, was there a difference with the way that players were to you towards these other guys? And he was basically like, not really. It's because once you stop playing, and especially when you're a role player, it might be different if you're Jason Kidd or even to an extent Chauncey Billups, but he had to really prove his coaching credentials, and that was what he was focused on. So it wasn't like, hey, back when I played with Rashid, it was a little bit more like, hey, look, I know the X's and O's too. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's not, I know that you just assume that Quinn Snyder has that in his bag and Taylor Jenkins does, because how else are they going to be coaches there since they didn't play? Well, so First of all, Quinn was a high school star and then played at Duke. But I mean, in the way that NBA players, I don't think necessarily know that Quinn could hoop back in the day.
I didn't know that either.
I didn't know that either.
I didn't know he played at Duke.
Dude, Quinn was State Player of the Year in Washington. Like he balled.
Oh wow.
Yeah, Quinn has some swagger there to him. He's a little taller than you think too when you see him in person. But he's got that kind of like agile type body.
He got that presence too, where it's like, yeah.
He probably has a hezzy.
Yeah, 100% hezzy. No question about that. Yeah, up fake, they'll step through. So definitely crossover, but. That's the thing with Darvin, is that he was really intent upon showing that he could hack it as a coach. And so I think he thought of himself more as a coach in that context, and he didn't worry about the fact that he used to play. That's not to say that he won't tell a story here or there about Ben Wallace and Rashid and all the other guys that he played with. But I think that Darvin's point was that you can get to this point as a head coach in a lot of different ways. You got Billy Donovan as the college coach, you have the former players, you have the film room guys, and then you got the stars. And the trend to me, guys, has been more the last couple hires like Willie Green and Ime Udoka, and even going back to Ty Lue. It's been a little bit more towards the former role player than it has even the film room coaches. But those are the two kind of archetypes right now, with the occasional Jason Kidd mixed in.
Right. Poor Steve Nash. He's out there and ruining the superstar now turned head coach rating. Him and Jason Kidd trying to balance each other out as far as former players.
Honestly, you mentioned like gravity. That's something that definitely resonated with me. And I feel like every time I hear him speak, I want to run through a wall. And I think hopefully, as a Laker fan, I think that will help exude that level of confidence into the players and the roster construction. And that kind of brings it to the next point. And Mike, I think, there was a clear game plan pertaining to free agency. And there was a clear alignment with Coach Ham. I know it was reported that Coach Ham sat in the war room to pitch to players to join the Lakers. And, in today's NBA, it's in how skilled it is and how much it's evolved. I think it's very, very important to be able to have, roster construction being utmost importance and having players that fit your philosophy. And I think, the Lakers front office, they did a really good job finding players that, add to the youth bucket, athleticism, high motor. A lot of the players that they added there definitely fill that void. So I wanted to get your opinion and see your, viewpoint on how, last offseason is, a little bit different than this year's, and what role did Coach?
A little, yeah. I'd say it's
more than that.
Night and day, yeah.
Night and day for sure. And touch upon like Coach Ham, how much did he play within the roster construction part of it?
Well, I definitely think he had an impact there, but I also think it was pretty obvious what types of players that the Lakers needed to get this year
Mm,
after what we saw last year. And here's where it's tricky. And so the Lakers, they make the trade for Anthony Davis, but they still have some pieces there, right? Whether it was KCP or Kuzma or Alex Caruso, like these two-way type players that were really capable of doing a lot of the little things and a lot of the dirty work around LeBron and AD. And then so they win the title. The next year, I thought that the moves that the Lakers made were really like pretty good for the most part and opportunistic at the time. The taking the shot at Harrell at that money made some sense. Now, I think what ended up happening and what was unfortunate with that, especially with AD going down, then that made Harrell, put into a bigger spot than he probably should have been in.
mm.
And like he wasn't going to be able to hold up. But had he just been in that role that he played like early in the season when they opened up hot, right, and were still like basically in first place in January before AD went down the first time, coming off of that bubble tax, and him just coming in with energy and kind of getting him through some mid-December games in Detroit, like that kind of thing was fine.
Yep.
Schroeder at the price that they got him, same kind of thing, like good energy, good aggressiveness, good defensive pressure, and they still had enough of the two-way guys to do all of the little things that meant that LeBron and AD didn't have to do everything. And that team absolutely could have won the title in terms of talent. They're up 2-1 on Phoenix. The whole team wears down because they had a 2-month off season coming out of the bubble. And so coming out of that, I think that there was what was lacking in that playoff series against Phoenix? And that may have been over adjusted to in trying to figure out a couple of the vets that were going to come in, maybe a push too much towards shooting and playmaking and away from those two-way type players. And then, of course, the biggest thing was the Westbrook trade. And that sends out a lot of the two-way guys and puts a lot on Russ coming in and hoping that fits alongside LeBron and AD, which they didn't play many games together, and they ended up being 21. And that was once that amount of salary was committed in that context to Westbrook, it was going to be very difficult to do anything other than the minimum type contracts that they got. And so here's the difference from this season now. Westbrook's still there in terms of the percentage of the salary cap that's being taken, but I think the realization was, even if it's minimums in a vet in a mini mid for Lonnie Walker, those guys have to be able to do. You have to get guys that at least have the potential to do some of those little things around LeBron and AD, and that was to me very clear even early last season, which is why they went out and got Stanley Johnson, which is why they went out and got Wendy Gabriel. And I think that the players that they bring in to start this season are at a caliber that has the chance to be above that, right? Like with Toscano Anderson, with Troy Brown Jr. Those players, I think, do those things that are required better than the guys on the roster last year could, whether it was Ariza or Ellington or going on down the list. So I do think that all of that was notable, and the fact that they were able to get Bryant and Jones, by the way, at the center spot on vet mins, I liked that too. That's just different from Dwight, from Howard and Jordan last year in terms of what they can do with bounce and energy and even some floor spacing from Thomas Bryant. So I like the way those guys fit around LeBron and AD better than last year's did.
Which one of those additions on the list? Obviously, a lot of guys that you expect to give energy on both sides of the ball have opportunity to make impact in the rotations. They will be looked to make impact in the rotations. Which one caught your eye the most, Mike? Which one are you most excited for as far as the Lakers free agent signings today?
It's a good question because I think I could make an argument for probably 4 of the 5 guys, but the one that I find myself most intrigued by is Troy Brown Jr. I think part of that is because he's probably the least known by, I don't want to say casual sounds too sort of
negative,
like not giving fans enough credit, right? Because it's really hard to have a real job and or kids or be a student and then watch every single game, not only of the Lakers, but every other team. And so, but that's what I mean. Like even somebody that watches every other game, at least is, probably more than most and is on League Pass every day. Troy Brown Jr. played 16 minutes off the bench for Chicago last year. So even if you're watching a bunch of Bulls games, you're not seeing him that often, and they put him into a 3-and-D spot where so he's not getting a chance to create much, and it worked pretty well because of what they had going, and I get why they did it, but I think it masked a couple things that he was able to do more on the ball in Washington when he was the 15th pick. And I also think people might be surprised to know that he's 22. Like, he's just about to turn 23 at the end of July. And he's got good size. He's got pretty good athleticism. The shot, I think, looked better as the season went on. And he shot 40%, over 40% after the All-Star break. So I'm just intrigued by maybe Brown is a little bit better than the league realizes. And, maybe he's got a chance to play a bigger role than some might expect. So that's my Brown thing. But if I really do have to just pick one, I'll probably go to JTA. I just think that the energy that he brings, the kind of belief in himself, I just mentioned my whole thing on dirty work and how important that is to have guys that are really willing to sacrifice and be winning players. And he's definitely got all that. And that to me is something that the Lakers just struggled to find last year. They struggled to have guys that could do that. And so I think that's going to be a big time key for them, regardless of how he shoots from three or, what he ends up, if he ends up being able to scale up some defensively or scale down some, whatever that may be. I just think that's one of the things, that heart that he represents, that I think is going to be big.
Mike, who do you think is going to start next to AD? I know on the film room you guys were going back and forth between Bryant and Jones, and I think you were beating the Damian Jones drum a little bit.
I mean, so Pete just started. The reason, my recollection, now this could be wrong, right? My memory is already. I very affectionately blame my third child for my memory having gone down the hill in these last 2 years. Shout out to Riggs. I mean, Pete brought up that he thought it was going to be Bryant, and so I was more just raising the question as thinking I don't know, I think I want to see it a little bit, but the way that Bryant spaces the floor, right, and the idea of him as a floor spacer, as somebody who for an extended period of time in the NBA did shoot over 40% from three, during one of the seasons in Washington. That part is very intriguing, thinking about having that paint be at least relatively open or leaving the spot for Darvin's one in. But you can also do the one in with a rim runner, with somebody like Jones and a lob threat. And so I don't know if there's a clear answer in terms of who's the better player between the two. So my point with Jones is that he played better last year than Bryant did. Now, a lot of that is because Bryant was continuing to recover from his ACL surgery. Yeah. So with now a full a half calendar year since he last played to really get that knee feeling great, which Bryant did say it does. It feels great, not good, he said. That I think is part of Pete's point, where if we're assuming the full health Thomas Bryant, and Pete was making the point that he likes his girth in some ways inside next to AD, whereas Jones is a little bit more vertical. It was an interesting point, but I don't know if it's settled yet. I know that the Lakers coaching staff, and they're talking about it and trying to figure it out, but it also depends greatly on what happens with the rest of the roster and whether or not there's a trade or not. So I'm just still leaving it as a to be determined and not sort of counting out one way or the other at this point.
No, it totally makes sense.
And Mike, we're not going to get you in trouble by opening that door about roster moves or anything like that. I know there's stuff you can say and you can't say, but what I will want to just transition as we get ready to wrap up the show is a question about the franchise player. The man responsible for this era of Lakers basketball, Mr. LeBron James. He has his own little contract situation coming up here, right? Pretty soon, I believe it's the beginning of August, he'll be able to, make a new contract, extend, decide not to do anything. My question to you just pretty simply is, do you see this being the season of the LeBron contract limbo, or do you see that this gets wrapped up fairly quickly before we tip off for the next season?
No, this has been one of those issues that I have had very little concern about, and I don't mean concern in terms of like whether or not something gets done or not. I don't see it as likely that either side wants to move on, from that relationship. And I also don't think that in terms of having something drag out, I don't see as particularly likely. But I have no info on it. I have not talked to LeBron about it. I have not talked to the front office about it, other than Rob Pelinka was asked, right? And LeBron was asked at their exit interviews, and both sides were like, oh, no, yeah, absolutely want LeBron to be a Laker. LeBron said he absolutely wants to be a Laker, loves living in LA, the whole thing. So to me, whatever the details of it are, I do think get figured out, because I think there's mutual motivation. And it's not, that to me is not one of those pressing questions like what's going to happen here. It could go either way. Like I don't see it that way personally. I think that what the roster is going to look like is more of a question and I don't even really think those two things are as related as some might think. Yeah, I think that this is that's just been my perspective. I have not been like looking at that August date and sweating, thinking like, oh, what's going to happen here? This is LeBron entering. He's under contract. He's entering year 20, which I did an article on this a couple weeks ago. Now I'm forgetting, but I think it's either 9 or 10 players that have ever played that many seasons. And so to think about that far into the future, even though LeBron is unique amongst that group because he is the best, that like he will be the best player entering year 20 in terms of what he can still do physically on the court. Right. Yeah, it's not even close. It's not even close. So which means that maybe his window kind of keeps extending further as he ages further. But again, it's not something that I'm sweating about that. I mean, it's not like, this is not like when Giannis was coming up to, is he going to stay in Milwaukee or go somewhere else? Like what's going to happen at that type of an age? So that's another long-winded answer there to just say like, nah, I'm not worried about that.
Cool. That's a social media argument. We'll save that for the timeline for everybody else to argue and get the tinfoil hats over and just start, reading between whatever lines that might not even be there to read between. I heard Los Angeles is an amazing place to live, but I just want for the record to say, you did say that Chicago is your favorite city in the world, right?
The city of Chicago to me is a amazing city. And we don't need to get too deep into it, but when the Great Fire, right, in the 19th century, it enabled Chicago and Chicagoans to rebuild the city on a much more advanced system. And so the way that it is organized makes a lot more sense than a lot of other cities that are more sprawling and sort of have just added pockets to and extended out. Whereas that's not Chicago got an opportunity to really like think about what the downtown was going to be like. So that, yes, it is an amazing place. Do love me some Chicago. But would I prefer to live anywhere other than Los Angeles? No, I do think Los Angeles is the best city to live in by far, and I love it there.
We were just talking about superstars, and we would not be doing our jobs if we did not talk about Anthony Davis. And I know he's been putting in a ton of work behind the scenes. Rob has mentioned that this is shaping up to be one of the best off seasons for him. And the way I read into Coach Ham's, interviews and pressers, he's mentioned that AD has been the key. He's the biggest factor. And we all can agree to that. Like we go as AD goes. Have you had a chance to speak to AD or heard anything about him, just walking through the halls of Crypto Arena or UCLA Medical Center? And what's his mindset heading to the season?
So nothing on the record, right? So if I talk to players in the offseason and it's not on the record, then I'm always careful not to relay any of those types of conversations. But I do know that, like what Rob was just said on record about AD, and what Darvin has said on the record about their conversations with AD, they are excited about where he's at. I mean, the only thing that I've been trying to piece together is looking at his last couple seasons and what was his approach in the offseason to get ready for that next season. And I know that, so entering the year after the Lakers won the title was a mess, because AD said it on media day. It's like, I'm not ready. My body is not ready. I'm not recovered from the bubble, and now we got to start this season over. Like, I'm tired. So so that was, and we saw how that played out, right? We saw how that played out for him in ultimately getting injured. Then the next season still wasn't normal, because that season had gone later. And he came in also thinking, you know what, I'm probably going to have to play more center. And so he bulked up some and he got stronger. And I think that had an impact on his game. I think it had an impact potentially on his jump shot, on his movement, on the stress on his body when he landed, on whether it was from a jump shot or jumping across the lane or whatever it might have been. And so I'm curious if he's looked at all that and said, you know what, like maybe it's time to get back to being a little lighter. Maybe it's time to get back to, not just because the Lakers might play, if they play centers more and he plays more power forward until later in the game when everybody goes small anyway. And then that's the real advantage of Anthony Davis, because you can still be quote unquote small while being huge with him out there, you know, and nobody else can do that other than really Giannis in the whole league. And, you know, maybe like Mobley is starting to get to that point, although he doesn't have the same kind of usage offensively as Giannis or AD does. So, but I digress. The point is, if AD comes in like that, you know, then I'm gonna really be kind of have the eyebrow up. And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that yet. And I can agree with Darvin and with what Rob has said about how obviously important that AD is this year, and how with LeBron, as we had discussed before, guys, going into year 20, AD does need to pick it up more. Like he does need to step up and be that real, like all NBA first team type caliber star that he was 2 seasons ago when he was all NBA first team with LeBron. So that's what I'm kind of looking forward to most, but I won't profess to be able to know that until we get to training camp and kind of see where he's at.
Yeah. I think this may be one off season in a while where he's not focused on rehab as much as he gets to actually go in the lab and, you know, figure out his turnaround jumpers and, you know, actually work on the mechanics part of it and just focus on who he is as a player and not think about like, okay, am I going to be starting as a 5 or, you know, kind of catering to what the team needs. We should be really catering to AD. AD is the star we need to set up for success.
Last question before we get you out of here. Thank you so much for joining us this week, man. I got to get one, man. I won't speak for Omar. My idol, my guy, right? As much as Lakers fans are, is Mr. Kobe Bean. And as someone who has not just had a front seat, hell, you've been in the passenger seat for a lot of moments, memories, and conversations. Like, just is there anything that jumps out to you as far as a Kobe story or a Kobe moment that it just lives rent free in your head? It's just like, man, that dude was built different.
Yeah, no, I think about Kobe all the time. Still, it's really hard not to, with just how much the Lakers are involved in my life and my day to day, and just my own personal experiences and kind of what I learned listening to Kobe speak after practices and games, which was really my first couple of years. That was what it was mostly about. I was just kind of listening a lot. You know, I was new there. I think I was 25 maybe when I got that job, and I'm just asking questions and listening and kind of having Kobe Bryant, and then to an extent like Phil Jackson and Pau explain the game of basketball in a different way. But then, you know, as I was there the next couple of years, right, and there are more moments where I might be in an elevator with Kobe and might be discussing hip hop. Like I always tell this story. One season, I think it was the 9-10 season, he was on a Jay-Z vibe for the entire year. That was just all he listened to. And so that was the time where, you know, I was big into the Black Album, and so like stuff like that, like little pockets of things where you realize that really, if you going off the court, and he was a really smart, intelligent, but still just normal human who happened to be amazing at basketball. And then, but I think the difference between Kobe and a lot of guys that are like amazing at that thing, he was getting to the point where he was going to start being amazing at other things. And that's the difference to me between Kobe, where obviously he won the Oscar, but like, where was he going to go with that? Like, what else was he going to create? He was really getting to lean into the time with his daughters as they started to grow up, which is of course why it's still so difficult to talk about and thinking about Gianna and like that. But that was what Kobe represented in a lot of ways to me, was greatness, but the pursuit of greatness and the pursuit of excellence in everything. And once he spent so much time devoted to basketball that it was, you know, harder for him to start to climb those greatness ladders in the other things that he was talented in, which were many, but he was quickly getting there in all these other aspects of his life. And so that's, I think, part of the whole Mamba mentality thing. we focus it, I think, in part on like snarling on the court and killer instinct and that stuff.
Yeah.
But really, it's a more of like a life philosophy and a pursuit of perfection. And I won't tell the story now because I've told it again before. But you can Google it. I wrote about it because I played ping pong against him one time in Detroit.
I remember the ping pong story.
And it was just another thing that kind of represented the way that he approached that game. Is another thing that represented just kind of how he thinks. And that's something that I always think about too. And so you guys, I'm sure, have your own moments in stories, as do all Laker and Kobe fans. And that's kind of what's so great about him. He was there for 20 years. So he was able to, I think, touch the true Laker fans in a lot of different ways. And I don't think that'll change. Like, I think that'll go on. And it'll be something you guys tell your grandkids about one day, right? You're going to be telling Kobe stories for sure, just like I know I will.
1000%, man. We love it, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, man. And thank you so much for coming on the Late Night Lake Show podcast. I know we held you a little bit over, but hell, we couldn't get Mike Trudell on all the time, so we had to pack in as many questions as possible, man. But brother, thank you so much for stopping by with us. I know it is Summer League. You got games tonight. Lakers play the Clippers. What games are you hitting today? Are you doing them all or just the Lakers?
No, yeah, just today. Well, we'll see. Probably just the Lakers. Sometimes I go over a little early to catch out some other action, but I already got to see a few of the guys I wanted to see in person, so I'll probably get some work done in the room and then head over on the bus later with the fellas.
Perfect. We love it. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Late Night Lake Show podcast. Once again, thank you so much, Mike Trudell, for stopping by and kicking it with us, and we will catch you guys next week. For Omar, it's Ricky. Peace.
Peace.